Thank you, Cahirlock, and I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to the Finance Bill. The Finance Bill, as we all know, gives the legislative effects to the budget. And I think this budget was primarily based upon the VAT increase from 9% to 13.5% to the hospitality industry. And according to Minister Donoghue on the day, that's going to yield in the region of 466 million. But it's quite possible that the revenue from the tourism will actually drop and not rise as a consequence of this measure. And I'm conscious that we've already voted on this on the night of the budget itself. But as I said, I believe this measure may be actually counterproductive, because since this measure was introduced in 2011, there has been 65,000 jobs generated in the hospitality sector, and the revenue generated in this sector has increased in excess of €2 billion. And the reason, I suppose, I question the wisdom is, when you look at, and I recently had a breakfast briefing morning in my own constituency in Mullingar, an example was given. A cafe owner who has 4 staff with a turnover of €200,000 per annum. Because of the VAT increase and because of the increase as a result in the minimum wage, that cafe owner is going to have to find an additional €10,000 in 2019. The €10,000 on 200,000 of a turnover is a lot of money, and it actually puts into question the long-term viability of a business such as that. And it's not only that cafe owner, it's the small B&Bs, it's the hairdressers that was mentioned earlier on and that was out protesting earlier on. And some of the B&Bs that are in operation very seasonally. They're March to October, they're closed for the winter months, and I'm thinking about these service industries that are located outside of Dublin and outside of the tourist hotspots. And I think the reason why, I suppose, and what fed into this was the fact that the hotel rates in Dublin were doing fine, and the hotel rates in Dublin are high. So because of that, the hospitality industry, the length and breadth of this country was flying. And I think that was a flawed analysis. I really do. And I think that, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think the measure is going to be counterproductive, and it is going to put a lot of pressure on the hospitality sector outside of the main tourist areas. And I suppose the Minister, whose job it was to protect the hospitality sector, to protect the tourist industry, Minister Ross, failed at Cabinet. And he came in here 2 days after the budget, and he gave 3.5 minutes of huff and bluster, of blaming everybody why he wasn't being able to maintain the 9% VAT rate. He blamed the industry for standing up for themselves. Oh my God, the cheek of an industry standing up and advocating on behalf of the members. And I would like to remind Minister Ross that in August of this year, he contributed to the hysteria. In the silly season, when there was slow news, he was out advocating that the hotel industry was milking the system. In that article, he said that those large hotels would be penalised. He couldn't demonstrate what he meant by a large hotel, and he tried to reassure the restaurants, the small hotels, the B&Bs, that all will be okay because he was going to protect them in the budget. And I would say to Minister Ross that perhaps if he focused more on his own portfolio at the time of negotiations, instead of looking for his granny grant or split the house in 2 grant, that perhaps he may have more success. And again, Minister Moran on my local radio station seemed to blame us on this side of the house. That it was our fault, that the 4 musketeers in the Independent Alliance tried their best but failed, and we were of no advantage. Well, I would say, given the fact that we abstained from the budget, we have a major assistance to this government. The fact that we abstained and now ye pursue your own revenue generating measures. And I understand from the department officials that they're not adverse to a satellite account being set up to record exactly what the tourism industry contributes on an annual basis. And that should have been done first, to see what contribution tourism is making on an annual basis, so we could have a true analysis of the economic activity. I think that would have been far, far better. The 35 million increase that was secured, the Minister must engage with the sector and must look at the regions that are going to be most adversely affected because of this VAT hike. And I notice that there has been another sneaky measure introduced to the bill which is going to have a huge impact on the tourist sector in the regions, and that's a change to section 36 of the bill with respect to the vehicle registration tax measure. And that could have a huge impact on the tourism industry in Ireland. I believe this change comes without any industry consultation, without any information on how this could potentially damage the rural tourism industry in Ireland, as I said, that are already left reeling from the fact of the increase in the 9% VAT rate. As you know, this vehicle registration tax has been available to the car rental industry since 1993. And the mechanism is based on a refund of the VAT payable on the VRT element of the car price to broadly maintain parity with the pre-1993 tax position. The relief amounts to on average €600 to €700 per car, and according to the industry, 50% of the car hire fleet in Ireland is enabled through the existing mechanisms, and should this be removed, there's a real threat to that industry. And my main concerns with the proposed changes that are being introduced is outside of Dublin City, outside of Galway, outside of Cork, almost all our tourists, when they come to visit, when they're going to the guest houses, whether it be in Connemara, Kenmare, Longford, Mullingar, wherever, outside of the main areas where we don't have a huge network of public transport. The way tourists get to these regions is through hired cars. We talk about the Wide Atlantic Way, a great initiative, must be acknowledged, must be commended. But how do people tend to get along the Wide Atlantic Way? They fly in and they hire a car, and then they'll use bikes. After this measure, it's going to ensure that this is going to put further increases on tourists coming visiting our regions. Internationally, this will make our rental industry extremely uncompetitive in terms of proposed price hikes and our inability to manage capacity. One of the reasons or the excuses the Department of Finance given is they're saying that while Section 39 on the free movement of vehicles is expected to minimise the impact of Section 36, Section 39 is not expected to commence until July of next year, and there's no guarantee that the scenarios outlined in that section would transpire given the uncertainties surrounding the Brexit agreement in March of next year. And what Section 39 is saying, that we can have free movement of goods. We can get our pent-up demand for additional cars, we can bring them in from other European countries. Well, I'm sure, Minister and officials, you're aware that there's only 2 other European countries that have the steering wheel on the same side of the car as we do: the UK and Cyprus. And with the UK moving out of the euro, we won't be able to import from them. And do you think it's going to be viable to import for Cyprus? I don't think so. So, Minister, I would request that at a very minimum the proposal should be deferred and consultation should be carried out with the industry in order to ensure that there's no unintended consequences, and in order to ensure that the hospitality sector, the tourism sector, that has felt the real brunt of the measures of this budget, doesn't feel a further hike. Another area I want to focus on is the proposed 100% increase in the betting tax. I'm not a gambler. I say in count on two hands the times I have a bet in the year. I don't even play the lotto. So it's not out of any love for gambling I speak on this. But I do acknowledge that there are people who gamble and do so as a pastime, and do so in a very structured manner, and do so in a very ordinary manner, that don't have a problem. There are people with gambling addictions. That needs to be addressed, just as there's people with alcoholism addictions. That needs to be addressed. But what's been proposed here, a doubling of the betting tax on turnover. So it's not on profits, but on turnover, and I think it's extremely unfair, and I think it runs the risk of actually again being counterproductive, and instead of doubling the intake, the revenue intake, of actually reducing the revenue intake, because what's been proposed has the real possibility of ensuring that there is shop closures. And I'll just quote what Professor Anthony Foley said on the proposal. The overall, the negative exchequer impact on the closure of 400 bookmakers' shops could be about 35 million, and the exchequer losses will be in excess of the gain from the increase from 1% to 2%. If gross margins could be so easily achieved without adverse business consequences, the industry would already have done so and be operating on higher gross margins, and would have avoided many of the previous closures. 400 shops, with the possibility of a loss of 3,168 direct and indirect jobs. I think that's something that needs to be revisited. Surely there is other mechanisms, if you want to get money from the gambling industry, surely there is other mechanisms that you would be able to realise the revenue that you want to without potential job losses. One of the areas where I feel you have neglected and failed in terms of potential revenue generating measures is in the whole area of foreign truck tolling in Ireland. In Ireland there's about 15,500 HGV trucks registered, and approximately 7,500 HGV trucks in Northern Ireland. Every time these trucks go abroad, they're paying a €10 a day tolling charge. Any time foreign trucks come into this country, there's no tolling charge. And I think that's something that should be looked at. And the industry tells me, and again, not saying I'm giving these figures are 100% accurate, but it's certainly something that should be looked at. What is the loss to our exchequer in relation to that? They tell me somewhere in the region of €20 million. Perhaps it's something that could be examined. Section 99A of the Finance Act 1999, inserted by Section 51 of the Finance Act 2013, provides for the repayment to qualifying road haulage operators and passengers in the diesel rebate scheme. We have a serious problem with our rebate scheme here, because the way it's structured is actually not encouraging people to register, to go through the administrative process to register, because at the moment they're only getting a 1 cent return. Belgium has a similar excess duty to Ireland. However, in Belgium, the average diesel rebate was 13.8 cents in 2016 and 17.3 cents in 2017. Throughout 2016, Ireland was nil, and 2017, the rebate was under 1 cent. There's an opportunity, if we're imaginative there, to look at amending the Finance Act, to look at the amount of Irish trucks that are actually tank tourists, I think is what they call it, fuelling up abroad. That's a loss of revenue to this country. If we amended how our rebate system was structured, well, instead of losing all the trucks that are going abroad, we could be gaining, because the foreign trucks that are coming to Ireland would be able to benefit from that. Again, and when you look at the money that's lost through illegal and illegitimate fuelling, this would be a way of counteracting that, and I understand you're proposing the government is proposing to vote against our bill in relation to illegitimate goods. Again, an area that should be tackled, that would bring in much needed revenue. And again, I think Minister Ross failed in his duty as Minister for Transport at looking at ensuring these measures were introduced to ensure a level playing field with the haulage industry at a critical time of Brexit coming down the tracks. One of the areas I feel where there was a huge neglect by this government is the whole area of climate change. We had the awful announcement today in my own Midlands region in relation to the job losses in Bord na Móna. And quite frankly, I was astonished to listen to Minister Flanagan on the RT61 News this evening saying that the stakeholders must come together. They should have been working on this months ago. This isn't something that came at a last-minute notice, like a foreign multinational pulling out and giving 12 hours notice. This has been worked on for months. And the fact that a comprehensive package hasn't been put in place in advance is nothing short of scandalous. But we can't, unlike my previous speaker, we can't ignore the fact that climate change is a reality. And while some of us in this House are insular and don't have any concern of what's happening in the developing world and the loss of innocent life because of climate change, for the very people that bear no responsibility for climate change. But if we only look at what's happening in our own country in the last 12 months and the real weather extremes, from 4 and 5 feet of snow to hurricanes to floods to prolonged period of hot weather causing drought, why was this not addressed in the budget? Like, the Taoiseach acknowledged in August of this year that there would be a need for carbon tax, and again there wasn't the political will to commence that process. I think that was shameful. And the reason why we need to be looking at carbon tax is because the government has failed in the last number of years, failed to bring in measures to encourage people to look at renewables. We still have no guidelines for solar farms. Wind farms, we're still working on the outdated guidelines of 2006. The retrofitting of houses is too slow and not adequately funded. I have a lady in Athlone who can't qualify for the fuel allowance because she's €7 over the limit, and because of that she can't qualify to have her house retrofitted. Absolutely crazy stuff. And only this year the benefit in kind was extended by 3 years for electric vehicles to give some level of certainty. That's something I asked to happen last year. There's an insufficient numbers of charge points. And on budget day, Minister Donoghue made a virtue of the fact that we're going to have no more diesel buses from July of 2019. Well, I have a parliamentary question submitted to ask how many more diesel buses are we going to have in advance of July 2019? And I predict there will be a significant number, and those buses will continue to be in existence for many years, for in excess of a decade. We've had no real meaningful increase in the whole area of cycling as an alternative form of public transport, particularly in our large urban areas. And recently I visited Amsterdam as part of a delegation to look at how they embraced alternative transport. 65% of the citizens in the city of Amsterdam travel to work by bike, where they have a commute of less than 20 minutes. Think of what that does for congestion, and think of what that does for the environment. Finally, I want to finish off in the area of the health budget, and while it doesn't predominantly relate to the Finance Act, the very fact that once again there needed to be a supplementary budget brought into health is a disgrace. The mismanagement in the Department of Health, or maybe the HSC might be better described, is a disgrace. We cannot continue to pump money in without getting greater efficiencies and greater value for the money. And I want to make a particular note in relation to mental health. And the reason why I say this is because I was down at a third-level protest in Athlone Institute of Technology 2 or 3 days after the budget. And in that area, there is no dedicated ring-fenced budget for third-level institutions. At a critical time in a young adult's life, we must be providing the necessary services in terms of mental health in our third-level institutions. Because of the confidence and supply arrangement, we have seen an increase in the allocation to that area. And I would ask that when our contributions has been examined, that it would be made known to the relevant officials that third-level institutions need adequate services in place for people who are dealing with mental health issues. I'm very conscious that all that I'm saying here today, I'm doing so with my hands slightly tied behind my back, because we're facilitating an arrangement here. And I think the very fact that we're facilitating an arrangement, I'm hoping that the government will take on board some of the suggestions that I'm making. And I'm not coming in here looking for additional resources without coming and saying where additional expenditure, I should say, without showing where additional generating measures could be introduced, and could be introduced in a manner which will not cost jobs and will not put an extra burden on people's pocket.
Thank you.